I have to say first that I did not know Belle and Jack Linsky. The principals in our collecting affair with Mr. and Mrs. Linsky were John Pope Hennessy, assisted by Bill Reeder. We did publish a catalog. Many, many people on the staff contributed to it. So I cannot claim the relationship that Everett has had over many years with the Reitzmans, or the relationship that Mike had over many years with Douglas Dillon. But Mr. Dillon is, again, the principal figure in the case in terms of securing the collection. Mr. and Mrs. Linsky were entirely different from either of the collectors, or in one case, couple that we've been hearing about. They were Russian immigrants to America, and shortly after coming, they got into the staple business, and their fortune came from something called a swing line stapler. And when I said, "What's that?" many years ago, somebody said to me, "Well, pick up a stapler on your desk," and it was a swing line stapler. I don't remember. I'm not sure I know, to tell you the truth. They began to collect in the 30s, and they were here in the 30s, but I don't know what year they got here. Mr. and Mrs. Linsky were entirely independent in their collecting habits. They didn't seek advice from anybody, and for a long time, other than the auction houses and the dealers, nobody sought them out to try to provide it. Mrs. Linsky gave an interview at the time of her gift, and she said, "I had no background whatsoever in art history, and neither did my husband, and we followed our instincts from the beginning to the end." And so much for those of us who are here trying to learn for 40 years what works of art to acquire, because they did extremely well. They began to buy in the 30s, but the project took on steam in the early 40s. In fact, during the war, in 1942, Mr. and Mrs. Linsky went to the auction houses themselves, and they bid on the pictures they bought, and that includes most of the most important ones, as well as objects. There is no record in our department files of any contact with the Linskys until the 1970s. Sir John must already have known them. Everett had known them when he was here in the first years. And Sir John asked Mr. and Mrs. Linsky to lend a Giovanni di Paolo painting that I wanted for an exhibition in 1975. But as far as I know, that's the first work of theirs to come into the building on loan. In 1977, Sir John, having been to the Linskys, bethought himself to take the matter more seriously and asked to call on them, and sent recorded an extremely fascinating document for the files about the ways in which the Linsky collection would fit into ours. And Mrs. Linsky was very much impressed by Mr. Dillon and his interest, and it was with Mr. Dillon's help that the two of them managed to bring her collection into the museum. Mrs. Linsky had various conditions. After Jack Linsky died in 1980, Sir John had been already 3 years on the trail at that time. She thought perhaps she would sell the pictures. People often say that when they would like to attract the attention of important museums, and there were other museums who were interested in her collection, and she had a good many conditions, some of which are not conditions that the museum particularly wishes to endorse. The first was she wanted all of her works of art to be together in galleries designated in her and her husband's name, which is a practice we try not to go in for here, and we only accept collections under those terms if they're so overridingly important that we can't let them get away. She also wanted the museum to provide the galleries for the works of art to be displayed in and pay for them, which Mr. Dillon did. And she was, as all of our more recent collectors are, or most of them, impressed by the generosity of the Reitzmans and interested in their rooms, and she wanted Henri Samuel, who had been in charge of the decorating of the Reitzman rooms, to be in charge of the decorating of her rooms. She also instituted a restriction, which she will have known about on account of the Reitzman collection, which is that the works of art in her collection should not be lent. Additionally, she asked Sir John and Mr. Dillon for a catalog of her collection, which is this book, which was quite a grand and imposing publication at the time, although it now looks relatively slight. It interested me in looking at it to see that it actually doesn't say anything very much about the Linskys at all. It tells a little bit about their collecting practices, but nothing about them. And there were people who were not in the public eye at all, who weren't interested in being in the public eye. And one of the reasons the objects they collected are often small. This is a Linsky bronze by Riccio, and behind you momentarily we'll get to the Juan de Flandes, is because their New York apartment was not of heroic proportions, and there would have been no place for very large furniture or paintings. They couldn't have been fitted in. So, as you will know if you know the Linsky galleries, the works of art that they collected are on the small scale. In addition to bronzes and paintings, they bequeathed us a number of very important pieces of furniture, some jewelry, much of which has proven to be either by or mounted by Vosters, who was a, by now, very well-known antique dealer and replicator, we'll say, instead of forger. Sometimes these objects incorporate early elements, rock crystal of an earlier date, but then mounted in this way. There are lovely small objects in ivory, automatons, gold boxes, things of that kind. I would have chosen for this exhibition the Rubens portrait on copper. He rarely painted works of this kind. It's very, very small. But everybody would have chosen something other than what you see here.
That's also the earliest dated Rubens.
Right. Yeah. One day in 1981, Sir John came trotting into the office with a paper bag. He usually didn't walk around with paper bags. And the paper bag had a painting belonging to Mrs. Linsky, which is now ascribed to the master of the Orcagnesque Misericordia, and which is standing in a vitrine in the same gallery in which the Duccio is normally displayed. And he came along to my office, which he usually didn't do, and he said, "Take this." So I said, "Yes, Sir John, what is it?" And he said, "Well, Belle said I was to take it away, so I did. Here it is." And she had given him a paper bag to put it in. And he said, well, the museum could send for it. But she said, no, she wasn't interested in that. She was giving it now, and he should take it along to the museum, and so he did, thereby causing a good deal of noise and commotion in the registrar's office, which is most ardently opposed to transactions of that kind. The same year, urged on by Sir John, because there was always a certain risk, she gave two very important Peruginos, and these pictures are not displayed in the Linsky galleries, are not covered by the same restrictions, and you will find them in the European paintings galleries in their chronological place. In this exhibition, there are three works belonging to the Linskys. The first is the Antico bronze that you see here. We have three bronzes by the Mantuan Renaissance sculptor Antico, and many of you know lots more about Antico than you did, because you've been to the Frick collection to see the wonderful exhibition that closed last Sunday. And if you were even luckier, you attended the study day, study afternoon on Sunday afternoon, which has been reported to have been the greatest possible success. In any event, we had one Antico in the exhibition, and this is one of two others. It shows a pan. It is not based on an antique sculpture. It should recommend itself to you because it has very, very beautiful chasing and surface finish. And there is one question about it, which is the following. Why has he not got a pan pipe, but instead a tube between his hand and his mouth? And why has he got a stub of something in his hand? It has sometimes been argued that this object was a lamp. I don't know if we know something more about that, Ian, than we did then.
No, but I just want to point out that it's actually the other great North Italian sculptor who's represented at the Frick, Riccio.
Oh, beg pardon, ladies and gentlemen. Pay no attention to me.
But we're lucky in this city to have good examples, excellent examples of both Riccio and Antico.
This is a still life by the Spanish court painter Melendez. You wouldn't necessarily think of this as court painting in the first place. It dates to the late 18th century. Melendez left a rather small oeuvre of, the number is probably larger now, but at the time we acquired this picture, there were only 100 and some works by him known. Most of them are on a smaller scale than this, and normally they do not include a landscape background, which is quite rare. There are two pairs of paintings with a landscape background in this style in the Spanish Royal Collection, and we suppose that this picture may have had a pendant. We do not know it to have belonged to the royal family. Melendez is one of the most important still life painters, and his work was not represented at all in this collection at the time the picture came from Mrs. Linsky to the museum. It was considered one of the most important of the pictures that she owned. Indeed, in 1980, when she was hesitating, Philippe wrote her a letter. Dear Belle, I missed seeing you in the past months. In our discussions regarding the disposition of your collection, you asked that 2 points be kept in mind: that a selection be made which reflected the special quality of your collection, and that it be kept together and installed in a manner similar to the installation in your department. The balance of the letter is a list of works of art that the museum would particularly value. And in the paintings category, the first is a Madonna by Carlo Crivelli, which is a very important work from the Erickson collection, but in fact, we have very good Crivellis, had and have as well. The second was the Melendez. The third was the Juan de Flandes, which is behind you. Fourth was an Averkamp. I don't believe there is an Averkamp here. Fifth was the Peruginos that Sir John, in fact, got before the bequest. And sixth was the Pax that he carried into the museum in the paper bag. So I think we've hit on all those. I didn't mention the porcelain. I'm not very appreciative of 18th century porcelain. But the back door of our office, which is near my door, leads down into the Linsky collection. I use that as my way to get about the building. And in the course of the 25 years that the porcelain has been there, I have come to love the porcelain. And now I'm organizing a small exhibition about Watteau music and theater, into which we will put some figurines from the Linsky collection. Now I'm going to tell you how I came to make this awful faux pas. Jim Draper was going to share this session with me, and I totally forgot. And so I lost my cool. Please accept my apologies. Now, let's just do 1 minute about this Juan de Flandes. But I will say in brief that his name means John of Flanders, that he worked for Queen Isabella of Spain, and that when she died in 1504, the commission, which is represented by this picture, there were, I believe, 47. You can give me the number that's right. There were 47 panels of this kind. 2 were by Cito, Many were by this artist, others were by a lesser hand, and we only know where about half of them are today. Nobody knows for exactly what kind of complex they were in what way they were to be arranged, because the commission wasn't completed, and they were recorded as having been in a cupboard. They couldn't have constituted the doors of a cupboard, especially not with an uneven number. So nobody really knows. Nobody knew who John of Flanders was. The other was Cito, and also a very rare master. The pictures went from this great collection to Margaret of Austria, and then to Charles V. The subject is the marriage feast at Cana. Presumably, the composition went on to the right. Juan de Flandes has implied that it did. You see Christ blessing, and you see the water turned to wine. The picture is in an extraordinarily excellent state of preservation, and this is something the museum would always have wanted to acquire and would try to buy again should another one come on the market. If Marion would like to say something, she really would be most welcome.
Interesting to mention too that when the Linskys bought this picture, they were in hot competition for it from the National Gallery in Washington, who owned two others, and yet they prevailed and got it, which is a great thing, particularly because as it can't be lent, we have really this fabulous work that's here in the museum. It then joins two others that are also attributed to the same artist, all completely different, one from the next. And this shows his earliest style. We think he may have started out as a miniaturist, a manuscript illuminator, and that accounts for this very beautiful, meticulous rendering in miniature of all the features of the objects on the table, etc. And I would just say one other word about it, which is interesting, and that is that we really have two works of art here, because the underdrawing for the painting itself is a master drawing, and it has many, many more features, including a little dog in the lower left-hand corner that was never rendered in paint. But now, with the possibility to use infrared reflectography, we can reveal that drawing as well. So it's really a fabulous work that they got for us.
Mrs. Linsky, in the article she wrote at the time of the gift, said, you know, I outbid the National Gallery, but she said there was another work of art I wanted just at that time, and that was the Fragonard portrait of a woman reading. And unfortunately, she said, that one ended up in the National Gallery, much to my distress.
She was very proud of the way she displayed the pictures. They were hung around the rooms, and she had those funny lights that were sized individually for the pictures, and it was her great pleasure to turn out the regular lights so that all you saw were the little squares, rectangles of light on the pictures, which was really very distressing. I mean, because the rest of the house really was black. It was like looking at little projections on the walls. And each time she went in, after having plied you first with macadamia nuts, which seemed to have been a passion of hers, that she always wanted to turn off the lights to show you how brilliant they were, and then you had to ask her to please turn on the lights and possibly open a few blinds so that you could actually see the things. And then she had all of the, correct me, Philippe, if I'm wrong, but I remember one of the great pleasures was taken in the room where all of the porcelain figurines were displayed, and she obviously loved, very much like the main character in Oots, the relationships between the various figures. She was, I never met him, but she was a real character. And I was the one who had to carry that paper bag back, and was the one who got called up by the registrar's department the next day and reprimanded.
To this story, I was a curator at the Museum of Fine Arts beginning in 1980, and I very much wanted to have the Linsky collection for the Museum of Fine Arts. And so Jeff Munger, who was an associate curator, and I made an appointment to see her with great difficulty. And we had prepared ahead of time. We knew exactly how the collection would fit into the Museum of Fine Arts. And I had heard that she was a fairly vivacious person. So I wore a jacket that sort of looked like a Harlequin jacket. Pretty bad now that I think about it. Anyway, anticipating this would please her taste. And we arrived exactly on time, and the elevator opened into the apartment directly. And as the elevator opened, there she was in a very simple black dress and a gold pin that said, "I love New York." And I knew we'd never get it.
It might or might not be appropriate to say that Mrs. Linsky let us know that if we were not mindful of her conditions, her collection would then leave the Metropolitan Museum of Art and go to the Boston Museum of Art. Thank you.
I'd like to say a word, if I may, about Linsky again, because if we're talking this morning about collecting and the relationship with museums, I think the Linsky collection is really prototypical of the harm that is done both to the institution and to the collector by the insistence on the collection being shown as a whole. The result is very few people chance upon the Linsky collection. It is not really on the way to anywhere, and it's not visited remotely as much as it should be. And people come to this institution convinced we have no Spanish still lifes. They have no clue that we have a Melendez. They go through our paintings galleries, possibly even Lehman, which is already better known, and they don't encounter anything like this. It's hidden away in the Linsky galleries. So their posterity suffers, and the institution itself. And as Keith has said, the Crivelli that you mentioned belongs to another group of pictures in the galleries upstairs. And to have an altarpiece divided among two galleries up and down because of the shall we call this, the wishes of the donor is really very sad. As you said, we make very few such exceptions, but there were many discussions about Linsky before we finally decided to have it as a result.
We are really contractually restricted in what we do. We can move these pictures very often. The opportunity to show the St. George and St. Dominic, which belong with the Erickson Madonna and Child, or to show these objects here, are few and far between, because it's a very constricting envelope, and it's necessary to exercise caution.
Can you put the Crivellis together ever, Keith?
The Linsky pictures can always be used for exhibitions they cannot be lent outside the museum, but they can be lent inside. So I could, for example, send a letter over to the council's office and say that we're moving it upstairs for 3 months for a temporary exhibition. But that's really the end of it.
We are also not permitted to put other works of art in the Linsky galleries.
Oh, so you can't put it down there.
No.
Ian is going to talk to us about the rights and the decorative arts, and then Gary is going to talk to us about not what got incorrectly into the schedule in the end, but the one we changed it to on collecting romantic paintings. So we're going to come into the next gallery.